Hey, what's up? My name is Sam, and this is my Kirby Squeak Squad 100% Tool Assisted Speedrun, or TAS. If you want to watch this thing without my commentary, there's a card in the corner and a link in the description for you to check that out. If you don't know what a TAS is, then I highly recommend visiting tasvideos.org, which is also in the description, for some more information. But for a super short demonstration, I can play this game on my computer through an emulator, which has a variety of tools, namely frame advance and save states. I can use these tools to put in whatever inputs I want whenever I want. So when I play the run back in real time, it results in a theoretically perfect speedrun. This isn't meant to be competitive or anything, it's strictly meant to show what this game could look like if you were a perfect player. So, without further ado, let's begin. Since this is a TAS, things are going to move very quickly, especially in the beginning here, so I won't be able to explain every single thing in intense detail, but I will touch upon all the important points. So, the very first thing we do in the entire run is something called a slide boost. By sliding off of an edge and puffing without holding left or right, Kirby can maintain some of his sliding speed through the air. Sliding in general is also quite fast. As you can see here, I use it over just running normally. Here, I manipulate these two enemies to get closer to each other so I can inhale them both at the same time. This sets up a mix, starting a roulette in the bottom left that I can stop at any time to get whatever ability I want. In this case, I opt for wheel, which, as you can see, has some of the fastest horizontal movement in the entire game. In addition, however, it also has some of the best vertical movement in the game, since using wheel immediately after jumping, called wheel jumping, causes Kirby to fly upwards with a ton of momentum. Since wheel's movement is extremely fast and versatile, especially compared to every other ability in this game, a lot of this run's route isn't necessarily centered around finding which ability is best in any given situation, but rather it's designed to maximize the amount of time that I have wheel while getting around its few weaknesses. One of the things that will help with this immensely is the bubble mechanic. In this game, Kirby can store a variety of items in his stomach on the bottom screen, which essentially just acts as an inventory. The most prominent items in this game are ability bubbles, which can be used to switch abilities on demand, and these chests, which are required for 100% completion. However, I can only store 5 of these items at a time, so inventory management is an incredibly important part of the routing in this game. This fact alone makes this Kirby speedrun one of the most unique in the entire series. Up here we'll get to see the first instance of using bubbles to our advantage. There's a chest later in this level that is underground, and only accessible with the animal ability. So, after smacking up Mr. Frosty here, I can combine the sword and fire bubbles in Kirby's stomach, much like a normal mix, which results in a wheel bubble. Now, I can switch to animal, use it to collect the chest, and then use my newly created wheel bubble to switch right on back, wasting very little time overall. Here, I spit out the chest that I just collected before picking up the bigger chest, which for some odd reason cuts about 10 seconds off this cutscene introducing the main antagonists. I guess we'll just have to meet them later then. I also go ahead and enter this hut here in order to grab another ability bubble before leaving. This is to set up for another bubble mix in the next level. Hey, wait, speaking of our inventory, why do I still have the wheel bubble? It should have been used up after I switched to it, but I still have it in my stomach. This is because of a glitch fittingly called item glitch. If you use an item in the inventory at the exact same time another item, like a bubble or chest, enters the inventory, the item's effect will occur without actually spending it. This is incredibly useful in a variety of ways. In this case, I want to keep the wheel bubble so I can mix it with the spark bubble I just collected. While I'm mixing them, I can shake the bubbles around a bunch on the bottom screen in order to change the pool of abilities that they can become. And I get a question mark bubble. This thing sort of acts like a wild card, with a roulette of a bunch of rare items and abilities. So I use it to create something called a big star. So with such a complicated process to get this big star, there must be a good reason, right? Well, just take a look at what happens to this boss. Yeah. Big Star is meant to be an item that does a massive burst of damage, but can only be used once. So you can imagine why it'd be a good thing to have when we can use the item glitch to get around the whole single use part. The best part about Big Stars, however, is the fact that I don't have to switch off of wheel in order to use them. So now I have a method to deal with bosses quickly while still managing to keep wheel as much as possible. By the way, that boss that I just killed was named Storo, and he usually has a phase where he gets stunned before he dies and is invincible for around 10 seconds. seconds. However, I was able to get around that by whittling his health down such that it was high enough to be above the stunning threshold but low enough to die in one hit. From there, hitting him with one more big star kills him instantly, with no room to be stunned at all. Another important detail regarding doing damage with big stars is that when an item enters your inventory, you have to wait out this long item entering animation where it bounces around in your stomach before you can do anything on the touchscreen. This effectively means that big stars have a bit of a cooldown period after you use them, so you'll often see me do some stuff in between big star hits, like doing some chip damage with wheel. This level's nice and easy. I hit the button before going up to get the chest so I can enter the door a little bit faster, but that's about it. And in the amount of time it took to explain how big stars and item glitches work, we're already at another dang boss. This time, it's King Dedede. I pick up a bubble before entering the boss room in order to set up for a very quick item glitch. Then, during the fight, I spit that bubble back out to do a second item glitch, before then just spending the big star for the final hit on him. I can easily remake a big star in the next level, so it's no big deal that I didn't use an item glitch for the final hit here. Alright, we've been talking a lot about what's been going on the bottom screen, so let's circle back to the main screen by discussing some optimizations I've been doing with wheel. One thing you might have already noticed is the fact that I turn around a lot, which is what's making that tire screeching sound effect all the dang time. This is mostly because turning into a wheel causes Kirby to move backwards for a bit, so if I initially face away from the direction I want to go, I will instead move forward a bit, and then from there I just turn around to start hitting in the right direction. In addition, wheel also gets a little bit of a speed boost whenever it turns, so there's rarely a reason not to turn around when I use wheel. Another thing you may have noticed is that I'm doing my best to avoid hitting enemies in order to minimize something called hit lag. Whenever you run into an enemy, the game freezes Kirby in place for 3 frames, which is obviously not very fast. Sometimes, however, it isn't possible to avoid hitting enemies, so I occasionally had to manipulate RNG in order to make the enemies do a different movement pattern, allowing me to weave right through them. This is actually what I did right here to get around these spark enemies. I'll explain a bit more about how RNG, or random number generation, works in this game a little bit later, but for now you can just think of it as luck that I can sometimes change to my advantage through a variety of means. Here, I'm forced to pick up what I call a mini-curb, which you're supposed to combine with other mini-curbs in order to make 1-ups. Since extra lives are useless in a TAS, I often have to find downtime to spit these things out whenever I have to collect them, or use creative means to avoid picking them up in the first place. This is a pretty nifty optimization. I can use wheel to run into this downward slope in the ceiling in order to fall just a tiny bit faster here. I also got an extra question mark bubble in that last level, which for us will act as an extra big star. Like I said, item glitches have a bit of a cooldown, so it's always great if I can get away with just using big stars normally without having to worry about running out. Speaking of big stars, another fantastic property that they have is the ability to go through walls. I use this here in order to hit a block and collect a chest, again avoiding having to switch off of wheel. Since I have 2 big stars in my inventory, I can just use them both without item glitches in order to kill this boss insanely fast. I also switched to animal here for there's a chest buried underground in this next room. This drill move that I'm using to dig really fast is actually a move you have to unlock with something called an ability scroll, which I got from one of the chests that I collected earlier in the run. However, with a quick item glitch, I switch right on back to wheel immediately after collecting the chest. One thing that I've been doing that I haven't mentioned yet is manipulating the bonus game at the end of every level, where you shoot out of a cannon to collect food. Since we're trying to go fast, we obviously want to shoot out as soon as possible. But, interestingly, if there's food in the top plate, then you you actually experience 3 frames of that slow hit lag I was talking about earlier. So I'll always try to manipulate RNG in order to ensure that there is no food above me. And I suppose then now's a good time to talk about that randomness. You can think of RNG in this game as a queue of numbers. So whenever a random event is supposed to happen, the game will take whatever number is first in line in the queue, and then do whatever event corresponds with that number. For example then, let's say the first number in the queue results in there being food in the top of the bonus game, wasting a few frames. What I would need to do to manipulate the queue in that case is, before entering the bonus game, trigger a different random event, which will use that first number. Then, once I get to the bonus game, it will take whatever the next number is, which may cause a different and potentially favorable event. By contrast, in some situations, like mixing bubbles for abilities, the queue is constantly cycling with time, meaning all I have to do to get what I want in that case is wait a little bit for the right number to appear as first in line before letting go. If you were able to follow all of that, you might be able to put 2 and 2 together to see how I can sometimes manipulate the bonus game RNG. If I have 2 ability bubbles, I can touch and hold one of them, tricking the game into thinking I'm mixing them and cycling the queue, which can change the outcome of the bonus game. If all that dark magic and witchcraft went over your head, then don't worry. I usually can't actually do this in the run because my inventory tends to be too full of big stars and chests, and holding those doesn't trigger any random events and therefore doesn't cycle the queue. The only reason this time is different is because I'm rolling with hammer for the next couple of levels. This mini boss has a stupid amount of health and would have taken like 7 big star hits to kill, which isn't very fast when dealing with that cooldown. However, hammer's fire move does the same amount of damage as a big star and can be spammed pretty fast. Additionally, it can also deal with those metal blocks back there, making it a great alternative even if I do have to switch on and off wheel. If you're familiar with this game's any percent TAS, then you know all about hammer. But that TAS was made before I, the Thomas Edison of Kirby speedrunning, invented big star strats. So now, hammer is really only used in more niche situations. This level is actually the real reason that I wanted hammer. Like I've said before, big stars save time because they make it unnecessary to switch off of wheel. However, since I have to switch to hammer here to hit an upcoming stump anyway, it ends up being faster to also use hammer for the fight as well. That all being said though, as soon as I switch back to wheel, I mix the wheel and hammer bubbles to get yet another big star. Just as a reminder, the only reason I still even have these bubbles is because of the item glitch. Every single time I've switched abilities, I've made sure to also pick up an item at the same time. Here I use some invincibility candy, and although it doesn't grant a speed boost like it does in some other Kirby games, it's still extremely useful in a speedrun, since it does a ton of damage and, of course, makes you invincible. Here I use it to plow straight through Storo to nab the chest and exit the level. Every boss in this game has a period of time after they get hit where they're invincible for a bit. However, the amount of time that they're invincible varies greatly. In the case of this mole boss, for example, it's not very long at all, and here you can see why that's a great thing. Well, you could see it if you didn't blink at least. It might have been too fast to notice, but each big star there actually did double damage, since both of them hit twice as a result of his short invincibility period. Even though I spent my big star in that last fight, I'm able to immediately get another one with a question mark bubble I got right before the boss. This is important, since I need one in order to access a chest later in this level by breaking some metal blocks, yet another beautiful property of the big star. Okay, so usually when I set up for an item glitch, I spit out a bubble that I can then recollect for the trick to work. However, in some cases, it's actually beneficial to instead spit out a chest to recollect. In this case, I opt for the chest, since gravity actually affects it unlike bubbles, allowing me to collect it as I'm falling for the item glitch. Another key difference between bubbles and chests, aside from their physics, is how long it takes to recollect them. You can recollect bubbles almost instantly in some cases, but chests have a period where they flash and can't be picked up. Although this is mostly a bad thing, I actually take advantage of this in the mini-boss fight in this level and many future ones. Okay, so when you drag an item out of your inventory in order to spit it out, there's a short period where the item isn't in your stomach, but it also isn't in your mouth yet. I guess it's in Kirby's esophagus or something? Well, anyway, while it's there, certain actions, such as turning into a wheel, will immediately eject the item without you having to spit it out. If you do this with a bubble, you'll just immediately recollect it, which is pointless. But with a chest, you can finish whatever action you're doing with enough time afterward to prepare an item glitch. I recommend you watch this fight a couple times to see it, but I shoot a big star, attack with the wheel to do some extra damage, while simultaneously ejecting a chest, which I then use to item glitch another big star for the kill. The juggling of items is one of my favorite parts of this TAS, and trust me, you haven't seen anywhere even close to the extent of it. Up here is a very large vertical section, which can't really be done too quickly. I do a wheel jump and bounce off the wall at my peak in order to get as much initial height as possible before then just puffing the rest of the way. Up here is the first, but not last, instance of using a big star, not for a boss or for a chest, but just for making movement faster. I item glitch one here to avoid having to press this button myself, which cuts out just a tiny bit of driving. Here's a fun fact, certain events in this game can cause Kirby to briefly stand on thin air. Usually this doesn't mean anything, but in some cases it's possible to do certain grounded attacks when you're not supposed to, which can make some fun stuff happen. An example of one of these events is ejecting your ability, which I'll be doing up here to switch to fire. What I do then is eject my ability in midair and, during the few frames where Kirby is standing, initiate an aerial slide kick. Then, as soon as the game realizes that I should in fact not be slide kicking, I can puff in order to maintain the sliding speed, effectively doing a slide boost without needing a ledge. With that, I very briefly use fire to light this fuse and show off some more slide boosts and other shenanigans in the downtime. Another event that can cause Kirby to stand in midair is exiting a warp star. If you pay close attention, you'll see that I burst off this thing with another aerial slide boost before quickly transitioning to wheel. This was actually the very first trick in the entire run, if you remember back to the first level. By the way, I don't think I've mentioned it yet, but you can actually cancel puffs in this game. Usually when you puff up, you have to spit out the air before you can do anything. But if you press B to do an attack before Kirby puffs all the way up, you can avoid that altogether. I do this a lot after slide boosting to avoid the air spitting animation, so keep an eye out for that. I use yet another big star in this room to access another chest while keeping wheel. I also use a big star while falling down here to hit an off-screen block and open up a faster path here. If you're really astute, you might be wondering why I didn't use my chest to do that item glitch. Because, sure enough, the fact that gravity applies to it makes shooting that big star significantly faster. Well, that's because there's a really fun game-breaking glitch in this room, where if you drop a chest and then enter a door, the big chest at the end here straight up disappears forever. I have some theories as to why this happens, but it certainly came as a surprise when I first got here. I guess you could call that yet another difference between using chests and bubbles for item glitches. Here, I mix my two ability bubbles for a question mark bubble, which will eventually be turned into more invincibility candy. I'll be using candy against most of the bosses from here on out to deal chip damage, since, like big stars, you don't have to switch from wheel to use it. I also make sure to collect a bubble before entering the boss, which I can use as item glitch fodder to slip in some big star hits while bursting this guy down with invincibility. Like the mole, this guy can be hit really quickly, so lining up a big star as he does this big sweep move just deletes him. Even if I didn't have invincibility for this fight, that single big star is almost enough to one-shot that entire phase on its own. That's how good it is. This bubble that I collected before the boss comes in real handy in this next level as well, as it enables a ton of big star abuse. I spit it out way up here in order to set up an aerial item glitch, hitting a fire switch through the wall and granting me this chest. It's a good thing I got that chest too, because I juggle it here to burst down this mini boss like it's nothing. We get a bit of a break with this room before using yet another item glitch for another big star skip, this time accessing a chest by hitting another block through a wall. This has got to be one of my favorite levels, 4 big stars and a great display of juggling all sorts of items. I actually do some damage boosts in this room in order to avoid hitting some enemies with wheel and wasting time. Usually, taking damage results in Kirby getting stunned and losing his ability, but both of these can for some reason be circumvented if you are crouching before you get hit. Of course, this is really hard to see since I'm only crouching for 2 frames, but know that you usually can't just run through enemies. I use a big star in this room to destroy a wall and access this chest a little earlier than you're supposed to. I then use a second big star to destroy another wall and continue. Despite their versatility, big stars actually don't travel as far horizontally as you might think, so it's actually not possible, unfortunately, to destroy both walls with one big star. Interestingly, it's actually faster to use wheel to ride down these slopes than it is to just fall after the chest here. I also do a kinda neat trick here. I want to eat this food bubble in my inventory to free up space, but I actually wait to do it so I don't pick up this mini curb, saving the time I would have wasted trying to spit out that mini curb later. It's worth mentioning that another time that Kirby can stand in mid-air is at the beginning of every level. It's not enough to do a slide boost, but it does mean that it's possible to jump on the first frame of the level startup, so long as you hold the A button from when you pressed it to enter the level. However, even though it would have saved time, I opted not to use this trick in this run. This is because it would occasionally cause desyncs, I think as a result of needing to hold an input down through a loading zone. This isn't too much of a loss, I'd estimate around a second or two over the course of the entire run, but it is a little bit unfortunate. This level is a mess to route. Not only are there 2 mini-bosses strewn about, but there are also 2 separate chests that both require fire to access. This first guy is no issue, I just burst him down with some big stars just as usual. But afterward, I quickly switched to fire and used some fireballs to get to the next chest. Here, I shoot the blocks, zoom over to this bubble to item glitch to wheel as the blocks are melting, and then come back to pick up the chest. Now that I've picked up a fire bubble, I can use it without item glitching, after of course ejecting my wheel to jump off of thin air. From there, I do another aerial slide boost into the chest, switch to wheel, and obliterate Storo with some more big stars, yet again doing the quick kill to avoid his stunned phase. You may have noticed that, for the mouse enemies in particular, food can occasionally pop out of them after getting hit. This food actually counts as an item that you can use to do an item glitch, so I sometimes do some RNG manipulation to make food pop out where I want it to shoot some more big stars. This level is very vertical, which is always a treat in my opinion, since wheel can make short work of some of these sections. I also just happened to pick up a bomb bubble here, but I don't actually want it since I don't have the inventory space to keep it. So instead, I just mix it with wheel to get another wheel. I could have also spit it out while I was falling in this room, but mixing it actually made the RNG for the enemies at the end of the level and the bonus game turn out quite nicely. Pressing this upcoming button makes some rocks fall down, which actually causes a lag frame, so it saves a singular frame to not press the button, which is kind of neat. I tried for so long to find a way to collect this chest without having to wait for it at the end, but it just doesn't seem possible. It is possible to collect it before it gets walled off, but I was just a couple frames away from being able to get out in time before we get locked in. Additionally, although it is possible to partially clip into the floor here, the game seems really against letting you have full reign of your movement while inside of some blocks, so that's not an option either. It's so close, but I just couldn't find a way to make it work. That's all fine though, cause now it's boss time again. Like last time, I opt for invincibility candy here for the most part, with some big star hits in between. Unlike last time however, this guy is invincible for a little bit longer after getting hit, and is constantly moving. All that, alongside the fact that his hurt box is deceptively tiny, made this strategy of setting up item glitches while simultaneously dealing damage with invincibility very difficult. Of course, it still makes short work of the boss. In my routing notes, I labeled this level as the worst level known to man. This isn't really because the actual rooms are annoying or anything. In fact, it's actually an overall pretty short and simple level, but the fact that it has 3 chests in it made the routing for the entire world way more difficult. That being said though, it also arguably made the routing more diverse and more interesting, so get ready for that. We start off this second level by shooting yet another switch through a wall with a big star to avoid having to switch off of wheel. Similarly, this next room actually has a pretty big skip, also involving shooting a switch with a big star to get a chest. However, in this case, it isn't intentional, and actually skips having to go through a couple doors. Here, I briefly switched to bomb in order to hit this switch in order to get another chest. If you're wondering why I couldn't just use another big star like I did for the other two, trust me, I'm wondering the same thing. The thing is, the big star's hitbox is actually significantly smaller than it looks, and the switch is just ever so slightly too low into the ground. Now, this next level is absolute mayhem. It's a boss rush level that involves a stupid amount of big stars and multiple different abilities. This first fight is fairly simple, nothing more than a couple of big stars. Once I switch to hammer though, I can use a combination of a big star and a fire attack to just delete this guy. The next boss is truly where it's at though. I juggle not just 1, but 2 chests simultaneously while also slipping in attacks with animal to do as much damage as possible. I then end it by ejecting my ability and using it as well. The level ends with 1 big star to access this chest and 2 more alongside another chest juggle for good measure against Storo. This level was absolutely ridiculous to route and execute, but it turned out being one of my favorites to watch back. That all being said and done, however, you may have noticed that I actually used my wheel bubble in that level without item glitching it. This is because the entire level was so dense with item use that there straight up was zero room for another item glitch. That's all fine though, cause this level gives us some opportunity to rebuild. For example, I actually turned this question mark bubble into a UFO bubble, heck yeah, which I then mix with my ice to make hammer. Remember a bit earlier when I said that food coming out of mouse enemies is random? Well, here I use that to my advantage to manipulate the bonus game, as kicking this mouse uses the first number in the queue, advancing RNG. Having hammer here is a bit of an interesting path to go. I have to smash some stumps in this next level, and although the game does provide us with a hammer bubble, it's slower to use than just mixing and using our own, since it has to bounce around in my stomach before I can use it. This section was extremely tight. I have to mix my hammers to get a wheel that I can item glitch to, but once I do that, I have to very quickly mix my wheel and this cupid to make a question mark. The issue is, I have to collect a chest in a short bit, which would interrupt the mixing process. So, if you look at the bottom screen, you can see just how fast I need to shake these things around to make it work in time. Yeah, they move so fast that they don't even move. I did need to do that though, because now it's boss time again, and I prepare by getting some invincibility ready. I also collect some bubbles beforehand, not only for item glitches, but also for RNG manipulation for this boss's patterns. I want this bird thing to swoop across the screen twice so that each big star I shoot hits for double damage. And as always, doing those item glitches in midair while also making sure I'm dealing constant damage ain't as easy as the TAS makes it look. It's worth noting that I actually used an item glitch on the first bubble before entering the boss room in order to keep this invincibility candy for an upcoming mini-boss. I might have been able to do the same thing before the World 3 boss, Krakow, but I didn't think to do it at the time. And these are unique circumstances, as I actually use my big star for the final hit on this guy. Like before, there's an upcoming chest that requires us hitting a stump, and that means that it's hammer time. Now that we're in the snow world, we get to see one of Wheel's more interesting abilities come into play, which is the ability to take on elemental effects. Like the drill move with Animal, this is actually something that I got from an ability scroll in a chest from earlier in the run. Although there's not much of a use for the fire or electric wheel, the freeze wheel that you'll see throughout this world is actually quite good in a speedrun, as it will immediately freeze many enemies that would otherwise take multiple hits to kill. This reduces a ton of hit lag over the course of the run. This level is pretty, for the lack of a better term, chill, so I'll take a moment here to talk about the run in general. I started routing with the spreadsheet back in the very beginning of February, and I worked semi-consistently on researching, routing, testing, and making the actual TAS for maybe an hour or so a day until I finished mid-July. The vast majority of the production was definitely routing, as I combined strats from the old any% TAS by Mug and from the 100% world record by Wakaza, while injecting big stars and other improvements of mine at nearly every junction. Speaking of those runs, by the way, although I was very often able to find faster strats for many of the rooms, and especially the bosses, I actually lose a lot of time compared to them through the load times in between rooms. I made this TAS with a software called BizHawk, which uses a very accurate DS emulator. This is actually a good thing since it avoids emulator-specific bugs, but the downside is that the DS loads much slower than, say, the Desmume emulator, which the old TAS was made with, and the Wii U Virtual Console emulation, which RTA speedruns are generally done on. It's estimated that I lose around 4 to 5 minutes throughout the entire course of the run due to loading. One super interesting side effect of slower load times is that it also makes switching abilities slower, since the game has to pause and load the new ability or whatever. This means that there are actually some routing decisions in this TAS that involve keeping an ability that saves time on DS, but would waste time with faster loads. Anyway, enough that confusing nonsense, let's get back into the run. This upcoming chest requires us to hit a block that is very deep into the floor. We're supposed to use the bubble ability, but I can do you one better by instead immediately mixing for Spark and using yet another move that I unlocked from an ability scroll to access it instead. Now, even though I had Spark for only like 2 seconds, I still managed to show off a pretty cool trick. I let go of right on the D-pad on the exact frame that I pressed B to attack, which not only causes a pretty weird visual bug, but it also actually lets you use 2 different Spark attacks at the same time. One area attack and one projectile. You probably missed it given how fast it was, so go ahead and rewind a bit if you want to see it again. It's pretty nifty. Anyway, speaking of getting chests the wrong way, here I avoid having to cut this rope by instead just inhaling it through the floor. This saves time because I don't have to switch to sword or cutter or anything. I can just temporarily get rid of wheel and recollect it easy peasy. I also spit out the chest so I could collect it by picking it up rather than swallowing it, which has a really long animation. Speaking of, one thing that I've been doing with items that I've actually yet to mention is canceling the animation of, regurgitation, I guess? Basically, when you use a big star or drag an item out of your inventory, there's usually a bit of an animation where Kirby bloats up with the item in his mouth. However, if you press B at the exact right frame, you can spit it out immediately, saving a good chunk of time. However, as you may have saw with that last chest, you cannot do this with inhaling or swallowing an item, just regurgitation. I adore this upcoming trick. I use the freeze wheel to make some ice blocks on the surface of this water, which I can then use to do a slide boost through this waterfall to avoid having to swim through it. It's tiny, but it's great. This next room is also really fun. This enemy drops a chest, and I have to clear the way of all the blocks in order to make sure its path isn't blocked on the way down. This is the first fight with Spinny, another one of the main mouse antagonists. Unlike Storo, we can't kill him before he gets stunned, so instead I use this time to kick him while he's down so food pops out where I want it to, and I can set up for some very quick item glitched big stars. Unlike normal items like bubbles or chests, food doesn't bounce around too much in Kirby's stomach and instead just gets immediately digested, so it's possible to use items much sooner. In essence, it just shortens the cooldown of big stars. I hope you liked that fight, cause here it is again. It is a little bit different this time though. Spinny only becomes vulnerable when he lands after every hit, so I have to make sure to hit him in the right direction so he lands on the platforms as soon as possible, allowing me to hit him as soon as possible. Next up, we got Storo again. Unfortunately, he has a bunch more health than normal, which actually makes it impossible to skip his stunning animation this time. So, like with Spinny, I use this downtime to organize my item situation and prepare for the kill. Now we got our first fight with another mouse boss, Doc, who again has an unskippable stun phase. I use the extra time here to juggle these big chests so there's one next to the exit. I want to leave this level with 3 bubbles, but I need the 3 chests, so I finish the level with 1 chest in Kirby's mouth in order to have the sufficient inventory space. Luckily, this still counts as having the chest at the end, so it all works out quite nicely. Next up, we got our last mouse boss to meet, DeRoach, and this guy goes down pretty quick. I manipulate RNG such that he quickly teleports to one side of the screen and then wipes all the way across it, allowing me to burst him down with a single big star, much like Krako. This was actually the reason I wanted to keep the fire bubble in my inventory. It's pretty clear why the candy and big star are needed, but having the fire allows me much more freedom in RNG manipulation, since I also picked up a tornado bubble before the fight, and I can hold one to trick the game into shuffling the queue. This part's a little funny. I use a slide boost here to get past an area that wheel can't jump over, at which point it actually saves time to just keep doing slide boosts instead of changing back into wheel mode. Also, I still have the candy from last level since I used an item glitch for it, which means I can use it here while swimming to get past some of these guys without having to attack them. Although attacking underwater is super fast in this game, it's still slightly slower than just being able to charge right through them. This is a pretty big swimming section, which I guess I haven't discussed much yet. You can't do much to go faster underwater apart from cutting some corners, but there is one little trick I do whenever I go around a top-facing corner like this one. If you start swimming to the side too early, then Kirby walks on the ground for a bit, which slows him down a bunch. So to avoid this, I attack for a single frame in order to keep him buoyant, which gets him to his max speed a tiny bit faster. Although I don't have 2 ability bubbles here, I can still slightly manipulate RNG by tapping my question mark bubble right before the level ends to avoid the food in the bonus game. This works because the question mark bubble roulette is supposed to start at a random point, so tapping it uses one number on the top of the RNG queue. It also gets cancelled by ending the level, so it stays as a question mark for potential future RNG manipulation. Remember when I said that ice was really the only good elemental wheel ability? Well, technically using this fire here lets me enter this door faster, so I guess I eat my words there. Also, after pelting this guy with some big stars, we're gonna switch over to fire to get a few chests in this level and in the next. Although fireballs are usually the fastest form of movement with fire, I do some real wacky movement instead. I'm using the fire breath to sort of terraform these clouds so I can slide kick right through. Although it's really only slightly faster, it definitely is much cooler than just using fireballs. I again put one of my chests in Kirby's mouth at the end of the level here in order to carry more bubbles than I'm usually able to. You might also notice that I have a mystery wheel bubble that came out of nowhere. I actually mixed 2 fire bubbles in the cloud room in order to get it, but although you can hear it happen, you can't see it on account of the bottom screen being completely white at the time. I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but item glitches cause the bottom screen to freeze as a white screen until you either use an item or enter another room. You can still do stuff on it, you just can't see anything, which made some sections particularly annoying. This level largely travels down, so it doesn't really waste time to stay fire here over wheel. There are some abilities that excel at going down, namely metal, but it's slow to switch from fire to metal, back to fire, back to metal, and then to wheel. It's not like we got too much falling to do anyway. Ooh, another swimming section, let's go! Apart from using those corner cutting strats that I've already mentioned, I also slip in some big stars here and there in order to hit buttons and cut down on some swimming time. This big star in particular is actually a pretty big time save, as it skips a couple of small corridors in this maze. I use my question mark bubble here to manipulate this enemy to move out of my way, and then I pick up a chest before the roulette ends in order to, again, keep the question mark for later. This level has a bunch of branching paths, so I just simply entered the doors that led to rooms with the least amount of resistance. And the chests, of course. And once more, the question mark manipulation saves the day yet again. This is a remarkably short level, just one straightaway room and a single chest. Unfortunately, I had to suck up a 3-frame loss in the bonus game, but nothing can really be done there. If the question mark manipulation doesn't work, then there's nothing else I can do with no ability bubbles. And once again, it's boss time. Much like our previous bouts, we enter with invincibility, a big star, and some abilities for RNG manipulation. I first manipulate Meta Knight here to quickly exit his little challenging animation so that he attacks sooner, at which point I force him to do a big jump to the other side of the room, allowing for a few good big star hits. From there, a few more candy hits ends the fight. By the way, if you are, I don't know, subscribed to the channel, you may have seen my community post where I showed a little bit of a glitch where Meta Knight clipped into the floor. Unfortunately, this does make him invincible, so it couldn't really make its way into the TAS without wasting time. Here's a neat little skip. Sword's upward slash goes through ceilings, so I use that here to quickly nab this chest without needing to grab and use fire. Of course though, it's right on back to wheel after that. Using the candy here is completely useless, I just needed it out of my inventory. I item glitched it just in case I needed it, but it turned out it didn't save time anywhere. This next room was insanely annoying. Not only is jumping off these star blocks a one-frame window, but there's usually not even a window to begin with. Wheel's hitbox is constantly shifting, so most of the time you just plummet straight through the blocks without landing on them, so it's only occasionally possible to do any of these jumps, let alone all of them. Here, I do some slide boosts to travel through this water without having to swim. It's worth noting as well that pressing B while puffed up underwater cancels the air spitting animation, making the movement here very fluid. This is a massive animal room, which means we're going to be doing a bunch of drilling. We can, however, skip a small section by using a big star here to hit an off-screen button. Apart from that, there's not much else going on here, so it's right on back to wheel. Say hello to the last big star chest in the entire run. Don't worry, I'm still going to be using big stars for the final bosses, but this one's for the road. And here we got our second Doc fight. I didn't mention it last time, but this fight actually only ends when Doc flies off screen, meaning it saves time to hit him as close to the edge of the screen as possible, or completely off screen so he disappears sooner. I also did some weird movement back there in order to manipulate the position of the UFO enemies so they're out of my way. And here we are, folks, the final level in the run. It starts off with another fight against a roach, which goes pretty much the same way as it did last time. Now that he's dead, there's usually this star rod that pops out of him that we're expected to pick up and use on the real final boss. However, since there's still some level left, we'd much rather just have Wheel. So instead, I eject Wheel, inhale, and then immediately spit out the star rod before recollecting our true ultimate ability. The rest of this level is fairly simple, but there is one important thing to note. Since the final boss is coming up, there's no reason to not use all of my bubbles. However, since bubbles are pretty much the only way to manipulate RNG, I have to do all my RNG manipulation before the fight even starts, which is pretty dang difficult. You'll also notice that I did another candy item glitch on some food in this room, which was just to get past these rocks easier. And here we are at the final boss. This guy has an insane amount of invincibility in between hits, which sucks because big star multi-hits are no longer an option, and candy is pretty much worthless. Luckily, however, not only can I mix my 2 ability bubbles for an extra big star, but I can also actually mix my candy with this maximum tomato I collected earlier in the level. This gives us 3 whole big stars to work with, allowing us to hit him 5 times, ending the fight and completing Kirby's Squeak Squad with 100% completion. The final time was 54 minutes and 44 seconds, although TAS timing was a little bit shorter. For reference, the current world record done by an actual person in real time is around 57 minutes. Although, like I said, that's with significantly faster loads on the Wii U Virtual Console, so adjusting for that makes my time closer to 49 minutes. But anyway, if you made it all the way to the end here, then thanks for watching. At this point, I'm legally obligated to advise that you like and subscribe and whatnot. I've got some more Kirby content in the oven right now, including another potential task for Return to Dreamland 100% in the far future. But I'm also generally gaming quite often these days, so if you want to see more, go ahead and let me know. For now, I'm just gonna let these credits roll until the 100% screen shows up as verification, and then I'll be on my way. Again, thanks for watching.